How did my father's betrayal change my son's life forever? I remember the day my father first held my son, Ethan, in his arms. It was a humid July afternoon, the kind where the sky seems to press down on you with its weight. I watched my father's weathered hands, calloused from years of hard work, cradle my newborn son with surprising tenderness. He gazed at the small bundle wrapped tightly in a light blue blanket, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the look of a man who had been given a second chance. My father's rough exterior softened, and I foolishly thought that perhaps, this time, he would be different. But life, as I've come to learn, is rarely kind enough to grant such mercies. Ethan was only hours old, and I had already painted a picture of his life in my mind, one filled with love, stability, and all the things I had lacked growing up. My father had been distant, emotionally withdrawn, and often cold. But as I watched him hold Ethan, I dared to believe that my child's relationship with his grandfather would be different from the one I had endured. That hope, however, was nothing more than a mirage. As Ethan grew, my father became a more frequent presence in our lives. He would show up unexpectedly at my door, offering to take Ethan to the park or bring him a toy. At first, I was grateful. I convinced myself that my father was making an effort, trying to make up for the years he had neglected me. I pushed aside my own reservations, my deeply ingrained distrust of him, and allowed him into Ethan's life. Ethan adored his grandfather. To him, my father was a towering figure, larger than life, someone to be admired. My father could do no wrong in Ethan's eyes, and I suppose I didn't want to be the one to tarnish that image. So I let it go. I let the nagging doubts in the back of my mind stay buried beneath layers of hope. Things began to change when Ethan turned 5. My father's visits became more erratic, less predictable. He would promise to take Ethan somewhere and then cancel at the last minute with vague excuses. Sometimes, he would show up late, his eyes bloodshot and his movements sluggish, claiming he'd been tired from working long hours. But deep down, I knew better. I had seen this pattern before, the subtle unraveling of someone who was losing control. I knew the signs all too well. My childhood had been littered with similar excuses, broken promises, and disappointments. Despite this, I remained silent. I didn't want to confront him. Not directly. I told myself that I was doing it for Ethan, that I didn't want to rob him of the bond he shared with his grandfather. I was afraid of what I might uncover if I pressed too hard, afraid of confronting the truth I already suspected. But the situation escalated. My father's behavior became more erratic. One night, he showed up at my door, disheveled and reeking of something I couldn't quite place. His words were slurred, and his hands trembled as he reached out to touch Ethan's hair. I froze, unsure of how to react, torn between protecting my son and maintaining the fragile peace I had constructed. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I realized that I could no longer ignore the warning signs. My father was slipping back into old habits that I had naively hoped he had left behind. But the truth was undeniable now. He was a man haunted by his own demons, and those demons were beginning to affect my son. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything fell apart. Ethan had been excited all week because my father had promised to take him fishing, something they had done together a few times before. I watched as Ethan sat by the window, his small face pressed against the glass, eagerly waiting for his grandfather's arrival. Hours passed, and still, my father did not show up. I tried to comfort Ethan, telling him that maybe something had come up, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He didn't understand why his beloved grandfather had let him down. I wanted to shield him from that pain, but there was nothing I could do. My father's broken promises were now affecting Ethan in ways I couldn't ignore. That evening, I received a call. It was the police. My father had been involved in a car accident. They said he was intoxicated, his blood alcohol level dangerously high. He had wrapped his car around a tree, and though he had survived with minor injuries, the damage had been done. It wasn't just the physical damage to his car or his body, it was the final blow to the image Ethan had built of his grandfather. I didn't tell Ethan what had happened right away. How could I? How could I explain to my son that the man he looked up to had betrayed him in the most profound way possible? How could I tell him that his grandfather had chosen a path that put others, even his own family, at risk? I couldn't bear the thought of seeing Ethan's heart break. So I stayed silent for a while longer. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how much you try to hide it. Eventually, Ethan found out. He overheard a conversation I had with my mother, and I watched as his world crumbled before my eyes. He didn't cry. Not at first. Instead, he just stood there, stunned, as if the reality of what he had heard was too much for his young mind to process. And then the questions came. He wanted to know why his grandfather had lied to him, why he had chosen alcohol over their time together. I had no answers. All I could do was hold him, trying to soothe the hurt that I couldn't erase. In the weeks that followed, I made the decision to cut my father out of our lives. I had given him too many chances, hoping that he would change. But now I understood that some people are beyond redemption. It wasn't just about protecting Ethan anymore. It was about preserving whatever sense of stability and trust one could offer him. I couldn't allow my father's destructive behavior to continue to impact my son's life. My father, predictably, did not take the news well. He tried to make amends, offering apologies that felt hollow and insincere. But I had heard it all before. His words no longer held any weight with me. I had spent too many years being disappointed by him, and I refused to let him disappoint Ethan any longer. Ethan, for his part, struggled to understand the situation. He missed his grandfather, even though he knew what had happened. He couldn't reconcile the man he had once adored with the man who had caused him so much pain. It was a burden no child should have to bear, but I had no choice but to help him navigate it as best as I could. The hardest part was watching the light in Ethan's eyes dim. He was no longer the carefree, trusting boy he had once been. My father's betrayal had changed him, made him more guarded, more wary of the people around him. It broke my heart to see him lose that innocence. But I knew that the only way forward was to be honest with him, to teach him that sometimes, even the people we love the most can let us down. As time passed, Ethan and I began to heal. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were days when Ethan would ask about his grandfather, wondering if he would ever see him again. I didn't have the answers to those questions, but I assured him that he was loved, that he was safe, and that I would always be there for him. I focused on rebuilding our lives, creating a new sense of normalcy for Ethan. We spent more time together, just the two of us, finding joy in the little things: weekend hikes, movie nights, and quiet afternoons reading books. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to smile again, though the hurt never fully left his eyes. In the end, my father's betrayal taught me a hard but valuable lesson. It showed me that I couldn't change the past or the people in it. No matter how much I wanted to, my father had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. But I also learned that I could create a different future for my son, one that wasn't defined by the mistakes of the generations before us. Ethan and I would move forward together, stronger for having endured the pain, wiser for the lessons we had learned. And as for my father, he would remain a shadow in the background of our lives, a reminder of the cost of betrayal, but not a defining force in our future. Life is complicated, messy, and often painful, but it's also filled with the possibility of healing and growth. That's what I would focus on for Ethan, and for myself, the chance to build something better, something stronger, from the ashes of what had been.